Good morning, everyone, and welcome. First of all, thanks for everyone attending the session. Thank you in particular for the Innovation Mastermind team for setting this up and organising it and organising me around the session. So thank you for that. As an introduction, I've worked at NETSCOUT now for over 20 years. I have had a variety of roles, both technical and sales management. During that time, I've had the pleasure of driving up the A12 to March on many occasions. I didn't think I would say it was a pleasure, but having spent most of the last 2 years sitting in my home office, I can see the attraction now of actually get the A12 and those long and difficult commutes up there. We've obviously worked with BT at Marsham, but as NETSCOUT as a company has bought a number of companies, one of which was a company called Technics. So it was one of the BT spin-outs based at Martlesham. It's probably technically the best company we ever bought in terms of the way we were able to integrate it into our portfolio. But the nice news really about that is we continue to have an active development centre, albeit it's now actually in the centre of Ipswich, not quite so good. So we still travel up there quite often. I was trying to find a quote to start this morning off. This is a kind of a great quote because it mentions a load of topics we want to try and cover. So this was Steve Jobs saying, innovation is the ability to see change as an opportunity, not a threat. I guess over the last 18 months, we've seen huge changes. We've seen changes to the way we work, changes to the way we live, and some of those changes are going to carry on. As we learn to live with COVID, most of our government restrictions have now been lifted. However, I think if you look at the lives and the workplaces, the changes will continue. It will drive opportunities for everybody. But also, I think, and like this quote, I think we also see a whole set of new threats that have come along. Threats to the way we work and threats to the way we want to continue working. So some of these threats are the things we want to try and talk about this morning. Just in terms of the way things have changed, we've seen huge changes to things like education. I guess we're all really pleased. I've got school-aged children. They're back at school. That's great. Hopefully they'll stay back at school. But we've seen education change to a degree which is unprecedented. I think for many, if not forever. In terms of offices, the way we work in offices has changed. We see lots of companies now, having staff working at home, either 2 or 3 days a week is kind of how they're going to continue. I have children who work in large companies. They're not expecting to go in. They're also looking at how they move around. I have friends who work in London who get London allowance who haven't been in London for 2 years. Meetings for us have changed significantly. I spent a lot of my time going out doing meetings. Those meetings now are very different, obviously. Most of them are over video conference. Travel as well. I used to spend a lot of time doing travel, business travel, leisure travel, all of that has changed. And then things like this breakfast meeting, historically, we would have met up, we would have had bacon sandwiches or croissants. Today, we're all sitting at home, hopefully with a cup of coffee. Everything has been replaced by video calls. Which really has changed, the way we work. We've seen new video players come up. We've seen, huge amounts of infrastructure having to be spun up very quickly to make these changes. Just in terms of the opportunities we've seen, the work-life balance has obviously changed. If I go and look at the local train station here, there was a car park for maybe 50 cars, and I live in a commuter area for London. People used to park on the street, used to double park. If I go down there now, I drop my daughter off, she goes to college. There's probably 5 or 6 cars, the same 5 or 6 cars every day. Most of the train station is empty. So people haven't really gone back to the office. People are enjoying this working from home. If I look at it from a NETSCOUT point of view, from a finance side, our overheads have massively reduced. The last 2 years, as I said, we've dropped all our travel. We've spent very little on expenses. People going to meetings. Whereas I would have driven up to Martlesham. I'm doing this at home. There's no expenses. So we've seen a huge change in overheads. And that's going to continue, I think, where we see companies reducing their office overheads. People aren't expecting to have the same size offices with the same number of people going back. Also, there's been, I suspect, a positive impact on the environment. There's obviously much less commuting going on. There's less travel. There's less, disposable coffee cups. Even if you go to a coffee shop these days, unfortunately for them, things have changed, and we see huge changes in the environment and the environmental impact of the way we're working today. So lots of these are positive. However, there are risks as well. Working from home brings its own challenges. It's we have to juggle, our home is also where we live and our families live. And that in turn means there are competing aspects to that space. It's what we've seen with our employees in NETSCOUT is, all sorts of, issues where we can't have a quiet room. People feel huge amounts of pressure to have a quiet room. And if there isn't a spare room in the house, one individual actually bought himself a shed from B&Q, a very small 6x4 shed, painted it white. And in the summer, he sits out in the shed in the garden, and that's his home office. We as employers need to understand some of these challenges. Some of this was already happening, I would say as well. But I think this pandemic has driven it at speed and a change which was wholly unexpected. On the right hand side, productivity, there are, and we've started to see lots of questions about, are people more or less productive at home? We see this in our business. We think there are some employees who have taken advantage of the fact they're at home, but also that's easy to work out, I guess. More difficult is the people that are really struggling from home. The people who are having to compete on their home internet and things like this. So we need to understand who can work from home and how productive they are, and how often we need them into the office. I think the other thing, and the principal thing really today, is the reliance on the internet. The only reason people have been able to work from home is the way the internet has being pushed out, high-speed internet to people's houses, the ability to use the internet in a way really that nobody thought was going to get used so quickly. If we do a lot of work with service providers, we can see the massive increase in bandwidth usage by all the systems you would expect, Microsoft Teams, Cisco WebEx, or Zoom. And so that change has been massive. It was already happening. The reliance on the internet was already happening. Lots of companies, had already started moving huge amounts of presence, their internet presence, and expanding it. So, if I look at a bank today, I can do almost the same thing on my phone as a bank branch could do 3 years ago. I can pay in checks, I can check my balances, I can move money around. So we'd already moved in a way with the internet to rely on it for our everyday lives. But really, this whole pandemic has changed that and really accelerated it in terms of, we need high quality connections very quickly. So in terms of that internet, NETSCOUT has been around for many years. I think it's 35 years old this week or this month, sorry. And we've spent a lot of time looking at reputation of companies. And really, when we look at reputation, we look at things like the availability, the reliability, the security, and the responsiveness. So what we do is we spend a lot of time monitoring all of these things. We're managing these things and protecting companies to protect, their reputation. I think in terms of the internet going forwards, or where we've got to, is the reliance on the internet. As I said, we'd already seen some of the changes. Things like SD-WAN, you get 10% of the price, you get 100% more bandwidth. SD-WAN had really started to change the way the internet was being used for companies, and that was only a positive thing. Software as a service was another thing. We obviously, almost everybody will use Microsoft Team or Microsoft Office, Office 365, we have things like Salesforce. Moving everything to internet-based software as a service also meant we were far more reliant on the internet. I think, video meetings now are the standard. As I said, we bought a company in Martlesham called Cytechnics. That company was monitoring it. it monitors like voice quality. It does mod scores. They had a lab where they used to have individuals come in and listen to calls and rank them. So we do a lot of IP monitoring or voice over IP monitoring for many companies. That monitoring has almost dropped to zero. Most companies now have almost replaced all their IP telephones, or the use of IP telephones has been replaced by video meetings. We've done it in NETSCOUT. It's obviously a lot less effort, I would say, to make sure video meetings are working for individuals at their house than it is trying to sort out getting them a desk phone to use. So video conferencing has changed significantly. And the blended learning, and really I'm looking at the schools here. I think schools have had, they obviously have had huge amounts of disruption. I have school-aged children. I have a daughter who's supposed to be taking A-levels this year, didn't take her GCSEs. What's interesting with the schools is, and we're seeing more and more in contact with schools and education establishments, is this idea of blended learning. So, teachers are now having to teach the class for the majority of kids, but they, at the same time, they also have to allow for the fact some children will be at home. So if a child is suspected of having COVID or is subject to a quarantine type thing, they can potentially be at home for the 10 days, but they may be fined for 7 of those days. And so schools have really had a challenge with this. How do we deliver those online lessons as well as the lesson in the classroom all at the same time? And I think that's what all of these things actually require, is what we would call a high quality internet connection. And so that's kind of a step change in where we've been up to this point. One of the other companies we bought was a company called Arbor. Lots of people know Arbor. They're probably the number one DDoS provider for service providers. What's quite interesting, if you're ever bored and you want to look at something during your video calls, we do a thing called the Cyber Threat Horizon, and it gives you a real-time DDoS attack map, and you can see, based on we see about a third to half of the internet traffic. We actually graph where the DDoS attacks are taking place, so where they're starting from, where they're going to. I should add, this isn't a real-time one, this is just a graphic, but it's quite interesting to look at. However, if we look at that traditional DDoS market, that was all about defending web presence. So if we think about it, if I think about it in terms of a bank, I want to make sure my online banking session is up. I want to know that, I want my customers to be able to log in and check their balances. There is a thing about DDoS, the mitigation, and there are many service providers doing the same thing. Lots with our equipment. So some of that mitigation can take 5 to 15 minutes. Now, that's probably fine if you're a bank, or if I want to log into my daughter's school and I want to have a look at, has she been attending, has she been doing her homework? If it's not working for 15 minutes, it doesn't have a massive impact. Often I'll probably sit there and blame the mobile carrier. And I don't really know what the issue is unless it gets in the news and it says that such and such was attacked and it was taken down. So it's an interesting thing. We've obviously got a large business, a large continuing business in this, but it doesn't really sort out what we're seeing as the new challenge. Interestingly enough, so we've been working with a number of schools. One particular college is a technical college. They have obviously some very good children in there, and they've worked out how you can launch an internet attack against the school. So this was happening last term. It caused quite a lot of chaos, I would say. What they found out, and it's quite easy to Google these things, there's, you can hire a DDoS attack. That DDoS attack, if you don't fancy double maths on a Friday afternoon, for the price of a cup of coffee, you can actually launch an attack against the school, and it will take down all the online classrooms. Now, when the children are obviously all at school, and this blended learning, that had a huge disruption. The IT manager of this school said, basically all the kids and the teachers, if you get a 15-minute outage or even a 5-minute outage, the kids have told their parents it's not working. The teachers blame IT. And they either go to the park or the pub, and there wasn't a lot of clarification in terms of whether it was the kids or the teachers going to the park or the pub, but I suspect it was a good mixture. So, 15-minute outage for a school is very significant. And what's interesting is they're almost at the front end of this, because it's political, it gets in the papers, so they can't allow for that, and so they're having to protect those links with real-time protection, which is a real shift change. I think the other thing is offices. We'd already seen this with SD-WAN. It's very difficult to protect an office. It may have hundreds of people in it. They may be using Microsoft Office or Microsoft 365. They have to have that internet connection up and running. So again, if you can take out an office for 15 minutes, it has a huge disruption effect on those people. And you know, this is a new sort of attack. We've seen some very large global customers now having to plan how they mitigate these attacks, because historically, you know, an office should just carry on working. If you were using Office at your desk, maybe your email was interrupted or something like that. But today, everything is being run across the internet. The other one is healthcare. We've been working with some healthcare organizations around the world, you know, delivering, you know, again, they want to deliver online meetings or online consultations. How do they actually do that? 15 minutes is a long time, 5 or 15 minutes is a long time. If you're a patient, you get very upset, particularly in countries where you're paying. In this country, we seem to accept appointments always run late and slow. But again, you need a high quality connection. And we've spent a lot of time looking at that, how we manage that, and how we protect those connections in real time from attacks. We had a very interesting discussion about working from home. We were asked to go to a meeting. It was a large organization in the UK, I would say. And his issue, the title of the meeting was working from home productivity. We had a tool that monitors working from home connections, how things are going and everything else. When we got there, though, it was kind of a different sort of conversation to the one we expected. He didn't have any real worries that people didn't want to work from home or weren't willing to do the work. His issue was, is their home suitable for doing the work? And so what he wanted was a mechanism to be able to go and look at their connection and say, this person can work from home, this person can't work from home. The sorts of issues he had were things like people that maybe had moved, or they live a long way from an internet connectivity point, and if they're a call center person, he would like them to work from home. It saves office space, it saves costs. However, if they have very low internet bandwidth, then actually there's a real reason to say they can't work from home. He needs to be able to justify it. He has unions. He can't just say this person can't work from home. What he has to do is explain why they can't work from home and show them some proper proof they can't work from home. The other issue he had is, even with people who had faster internet was competing bandwidth in their own houses. So it's interesting these days, you know, as I said, we bought Cytechnics. We used to go and evangelize about jitter and packet loss. My 16-year-old daughter can speak at lengths about jitter and packet loss and how it impacts her gaming experience. But that also impacts, you know, I can tell if she's playing a computer game on the network here, where things like my video conferencing starts to stall, the pictures start to freeze. So we've done a lot of work in this, and I think, you know, when you have a union, then you need some real boundaries about, you know, what is and what isn't a good working environment. And sometimes it can be fixed, sometimes, you know, they can put in place extra things. But again, it's really something where we've spent a lot of time and effort trying to look at how people, you know, what they connect to, how they connect to it, and what is and isn't good. And, you know, we obviously want to encourage people to do the right thing. But at the same time, you know, employers around the world are struggling with these issues of, you know, can this team continue to work from home? What's the impact? I will say I miss lots of face-to-face meetings. We've started doing them again at last, but, you know, it's a very interesting change to the way we're working and living. So just in a summary, I think, you know, what we've seen over the past 18 months is huge changes. Those changes have generated, you know, many opportunities for many companies, but they've also generated threats. And really, you know, what we were trying to do in NETSCOUT is embrace the changes, look at the opportunities it's given us. I mean, internally as well, you know, how things work better, but also then try and minimize the threats we have. How can we make sure? How do we protect these links? How do we make sure they're up for 15 minutes? That we don't have outages if we've got attacks going on, and that we can actually, monitor and manage the working from home environments. So thank you for your time this morning. I think we're going to do some questions and answers, but if there's any further conversations, I've put my details and Linda's details here. Linda is our account manager who looks after this organisation.